Vino Geek Podcast, wine from a Kiwi perspective. Welcome back to the Vino Geek Podcast. Now we're going to do something we haven't done in a long time, and it's a bit rude that I haven't, because it is something that it's very important to me as a wine educator, if you like, a content creator around wine and podcaster, whatever you want to call my title, is the relationship of food and wine together. It is so important, and we as Kiwis, we forget that. And I've banged the drum about this time and time again. But we as Kiwis think that they're not to be had together when they are to be had together. We need to be drinking wine with food more, because that's where the magic happens. It's all good and well having these wines that we like to drink, and they taste good by themselves, on a Friday afternoon after the week of work, and you just want something to wind down. Sure, that's not a problem. But then there's a whole world of wine you're missing out on, because you focus in on that wine you like to drink by itself, forgetting that when you drink wine with food, it takes on a whole nother level, and things grow. The wine changes because of the food, and the food changes because of the wine. And so, given that we're changing season, we've just come into autumn in New Zealand, we're going into winter, let's talk about some winter fare and some winter wines, because quite often wines that are really good with that sort of autumn winter fare aren't necessarily the first wines we reach to for just general drinking, unless you're a weirdo like me. So yeah, that's what we're discussing this week. So after the break, we're going to get right into it. Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too. Okay, now this episode was all sort of drummed up because I found some brisket at the supermarket. Thought I'd make a lovely, hearty sort of casserole type stew, really rich, intense, lovely, thick gravy that's all thickened by the ingredients rather than adding flour and everything else. And just let it cook out over a long time. I sort of had it in the slow cooking for about 6-7 hours. So, and I thought this really needs a delicious wine to pair with it, because, put all this effort into making the dish. Why not have a wine that really suits it? Now, the wine that I ended up going with, I actually talk about it, and I recorded that prior to this episode. So you're going to hear me when I talk about the wine. It's going to be a little bit skew and doesn't really fit in where I'm going, but you're going to get it. And I do mention that I had it with the stew casserole. And yeah, what I'll do is I'll just cut straight to that. You watch that, and then I'll keep going. Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too. Okay, now the wine of the week. I'm doing another live one, which is awesome. I'm getting myself around this and doing it properly. So yeah, this week we have the Cooper's Creek Reserve Syrah 2020. Now, as you know, I do live in Taupo, so I shop at the Merchant regularly, where I used to work. And yeah, this happened to be on special, so $23.99, really good price. So yeah, 6-year-old Syrah, that'll be good. And being as the Merchant years ago used to be a distributor of Cooper's Creek, I know where the vineyard is and how it operates. So this is from Havelock, so around sort of the Askern and Te Mata wineries, that's all in Havelock. So yeah, let's check this out. So the colour, still a good colour. It's sort of a, how do you call it? It's not quite garnet. It's still quite bright and ruby-like. It is fading to sort of a light garnet at the finish, but on the edges, but that's a problem at all. So there you go. Now on the nose, the lifted berry. This violet character. There's a bit of spice and a bit of white pepper. That lifted white pepper in there. Yeah, and yeah, yeah, good perfume, good spice. Palette is mid-weighted. You know, love the integration of fruit. There's sort of lovely freshness to it. Freshness, vibrancy. You know, soft tannin. The tannin is not big. It's just that fresh, that ripe acidity is coming through. That's driving the wine through the palate. Finish is nicely integrated. Again, a little bit of spice, a little bit of fruit. Just an easy, well-made, well-rounded wine. A little bit, just talk about my glasses. So these aren't my normal glasses. I use these for tasting. That's why I have them. I have some lovely big Spiegelau for drinking, but they're really good tasting glasses. So I'd love to say they're easy to come by, but these are actually Kopke Porthouse glasses. So for tasting their table wine. So yeah, very good glass. I had this with a stew last tonight, which is yeah, really good. Worked really well, cut through the richness of the stew very well. So that's yeah, that would be my pick for this, a beef stew. So yeah, enjoy.
Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too.
So yeah, the key thing for me with that Syrah and the stew casserole is the fact that it's not too heavy. You know, I think we get caught up in this whole thing that it's winter. Let's have a hearty winter red with a hearty winter meal. And while that does work, you don't have to be beholden to that. You don't have to, you know, have a big, full-bodied, heavy wine to pair with your big, full-bodied, heavy food. While it does work, you can easily get away with something like this, which was mid-weighted, you know, and that little bit of freshness helps to balance and freshen up that dish, whatever it is. Like in this case, the stew, sort of casserole type dish. It you know, just refreshes your palate. It helps to refresh you, and you want more. You know, Syrah has a natural moorishness anyway because of its the pepper and the spice and a bit of tannin. And in terms of Kiwi or the Hawke's Bay, there's always that, and even Waiheke Island, which is the sort of the other key big player with Syrah in New Zealand, you get that freshness, you know, whether it's that salt spray type scenario or it's the fact that likes of Gimlet Gravels, although the Syrah wasn't from Gimlet Gravels, you get that angularity, that freshness, that juxtaposition of that acidity and the tannin that meld together and create this sort of freshness and this zestiness and this aliveness, this really sort of racy spine, if you like. And those wines are really good with food, and especially food that, you know, is a little bit rich. You can actually pair it with these wines because they interact that little bit different. They freshen up and leaves your palate wanting more rather than, you know, you go with the heavyweight Australian Shiraz or Rhone red from, you know, from Spain, or Bordeaux not so. There is still a little bit of freshness, maybe a big Reserva Tempranillo or something. You know, Spanish Garnacha. I just can keep rattling off. I mean, say that Spanish Garnacha does have a little bit of freshness, or like a Californian red. You can get tired of the richness and the richness, you know, where when you go with something a little bit lighter, you get that palate refresh. You get that sort of that feeling like you want more. So you go back for the food again, and then you hit it with the wine again, and the food and the wine, and you know, they all pair up, they all mellow out. And I mean, one thing the dish was a little bit salty, so I really tried to ram the flavour in there to try and sort of counter the salt, you know. And I mean, in hindsight, it was a little bit over reduced, but I wanted that thick unctuousness, and yeah, the Syrah helped that because there was enough fruit in it. There was that spice, that pepper that helped dry it up as well. So it gave you that balance with the food. Um, and so yeah, this is what we're talking about today. You know, autumnal fare, but not necessarily, and winter fare, but not necessarily the stereotypical wines you would normally have with those dishes. You know, likes of, let's say, roast chicken dish. You know, if you've got the rich gravy, you've got the roast vegetables. I mean, it screams Chardonnay. Every day of the week, it screams Chardonnay. But why does it have to be Chardonnay? You know, why can't it be likes of, you know, a Syrah? But, you know, first thing that pops in my head is Cabernet Franc. You know, if you're doing the classic sage and onion gravy or stuffing with the chicken, you know, and then you've got roasted kumara, a Cabernet Franc could be really good with that because it's a little bit lighter on its feet. It doesn't have so much tannin. There's that freshness. There's that floral sort of herbaceousness that is inherent in the wine. And so that complements the herb as well as the sweetness of the kumara with everything. And just, it's not too heavy to overpower the chicken. Obviously, you know, most of us would tend to radiate towards white, but there's nothing stopping you from going with an oak aged Sauvignon Blanc or, you know, what else would I pair with it? And just a Chenin Blanc, a little bit more lifted acidity than your Chardonnay so much. And not in nine times out of 10, but a lot of times in New Zealand, particularly, less of that overt oak. So while your classic Chardonnay drinker prefers a bit of oak, the Chenin can work, you know, because it has the same palate weight and depth, but with less oak. So if you want something lighter and fresher with a roast chicken, we are sort of, I mean, for me, I love risotto. So risotto is a great one, and pumpkin risotto because obviously coming into pumpkin season, and so roasted pumpkin is great. And so you roast off your pumpkin, put it through your risotto, and again, where do you go with this sort of dish? You know, for me personally, I normally hit it with one of those richer, fuller wines, you know, just something to cuddle up. But, you know, you can go really go outside the box, you know, go things like Gewürztraminer, you know, that little bit of it, especially the modern take on Gewürztraminer in New Zealand, you get a little bit of freshness as well as that floral overlay, that fruit, you know, a little bit of spice, which does pair well with the pumpkin, and you know, a little bit of playfulness, and it's just a little bit different, lighten it up, freshen it up, but still have, you know, enough roundness, enough sort of, you know, and so, you know, and those are just a couple of options, you know, there's nothing stopping you from looking outside the box with different dishes, you know, your classic roast lamb dish, obviously, you know, if you're looking at Kiwi Pinot Noir is what you match in New Zealand with lamb, but you know, and you know, happy days. I mean, but yeah, Cabernet Franc again, you know, hit it with that because again, that floralness, that herbaceousness, be really good. I mean, if you like something a little bit fuller, but you still like a little bit of freshness, you know, Malbec, you know, it's known for being a red meat dish, but when you take a Kiwi Malbec, especially something from 2023. Now, you won't hear me talk up 2023 so much, but the freshness that's come from, you know, those Malbecs at the moment, you know, really makes a difference. So you get that tense sort of sweet, ripe fruit on the nose because it's that sweet, you know, sweet fruitiness. But then that acidity just kicks in the back palate, cleans it up, and asks you for more food, you know. So that's where you can go again, you know. And that's what I'm talking about, you know. Instead of having something like, you know, I mean, Pinot has that freshness, but it's a different freshness, it's just different, I suppose because Malbec just has a little bit more sort of meat on its bones, a little bit meatier, so it does sit heavier, richer, and then freshens up rather than being light and fresh. So those great examples of wines to have outside the traditional box because, you know, as I keep banging on about this, we've just got to be a bit more adventurous, a bit more experimental, while still sticking Kiwi. I mean, I'm not trying to push you too far out of the box. And I mean, if you want examples of wines that you should try, um, you know, one with Malbec, I was looking to do a Malbec episode, and unfortunately, the vintage, a rolled vintage, was the Ashridge Malbec. Now they're on the 2023, so it'll have that freshness, that zestiness that I was talking about. Decibel is something that's a perennial sort of go-to of mine as far as Malbec goes. Really, really good option and safe option. And it's from Gimlet Gravels too, so you get that extra freshness of the Gimlet Gravels fruit. Um, as far as Cabernet Franc goes, we were talking about that earlier. For me, Cabernet Franc is, has that, sorry, I'm not talking about Cabernet Franc, I'm talking about particular Cabernet Francs. Two that stand out to me and two that I see is really good value is the Estrella Alpha Domus, the Vector Cabernet Franc. Again, 2023 vintage, so it's got that lightness, got that freshness. If you like something that has a little bit more meat on its bones, this is a perennial favorite as well, is the Beach House Cabernet Franc. I believe current vintage is still 2021, so yeah, something from a hotter vintage, got a bit more meat on its bones, but still has that freshness and that elegance and that poise, if you like. So those are really good options. Yeah. So yeah, moving on. I mean, I've sort of touched on risotto, but I haven't really gone in depth with vegetables. I mean, more and more of us are eating less meat, eating more vegetables. Mushrooms, great option for sort of autumnal weather. One thing is sort of almost lean towards red wine with mushrooms. Not all the time do you have to have red wine with mushrooms. Sometimes you can have likes of a Gewürztraminer or a Pinot Gris, depending on what else is with it. If it's not a super, dark, rich sort of ragu with some meat, obviously, if it's got the meat component, go with the red. But if it's seriously just the like a creamy sauce, like a cream of mushroom soup or something classic like that, you don't have to have a red. You don't have to have an earthy red. Complement the earthiness and the sort of sweet creaminess with something that, whilst has the fruitiness, but has some freshness as well to back it up. So you get that, that complementary style, like so something like, I actually just had it recently, the Pyrenean Pinot Gris. While Pinot Gris is not necessarily my favorite, this has spent a bit of time in oak, so it's got a bit more breadth and depth across the palate, so you get that richness to complement the creaminess. Then you get that freshness coming through because it's central. It always has that sort of fresh, moorish character that cut through that rich creaminess. And Pinot Gris just gets, it just gets mushrooms. So that's a really cool little option there, and that's outside the box. That's not your standard. That's not where most people will push you with mushroom. Pinot Noir obviously stands out. So, think about what you're doing with the dish. Something I always say is like you match, or you can match, it's an easy 101 is to match like for like as far as how rich is the dish or how big and heavy is the dish versus the size of the wine. So if it's a light, fresh dish, have a light, fresh wine. Obviously, if it's a rich, heavy dish, have a richer, heavier wine. But just saying, you can juxtapose that. You can sort of twist it on its head and go, okay, oh, I'm having a richer, heavier dish. I want something lighter and fresher to cut through that, to sort of give me a point of difference, to really sort of spike things and just twist things up a little bit. So don't be afraid to do that. I mean, you might have some clashes at times, but just, a little bit of time, like a little bit of effort, a little bit of sort of just thinking about, what you're trying to achieve, and, with the experience you want on the palate, what you want to taste and what you want to feel and what you want to experience. If you just want that lovely, smooth, velvety, sit side by side with your dish and just enjoy that, sure, go for a like for like match. But yeah, if you want a little bit of excitement, you want to sort of, throw a curveball. You have a dinner party and, you got friends that think they know a bit or what have you, or they do know a bit, just throw this at them, throw a little curveball, but just be smart about it, just think about it, and just go, okay, I've got, say you're doing something with a little bit of smoke, what's to stop you using something like, just off the top of my head, Manowar Valhalla. They don't put it through malolactic fermentation. There's a little bit of oak there for that smoky toastiness, and there's that freshness. Could work really well. Alternately, you can go totally opposite. You don't even have to go with the smoke. Go with a lovely Riesling. Cut through the richness, that fruitiness complements the smoke, so you get that. So just think about it. Think about when you're creating a dish, what flavors do you like to put in there to complement that dish? If you're putting this, and this with a dish, make sure the wine has this, and this, because you further enhance that, because that's what you're trying to get out of the dish. So a little bit of homework goes a long way, and it really does sort of make a difference with that sort of thing. Now, obviously normally I'd finish up and go straight to the wine of the week, but I already inserted that earlier. So yeah, that's our episode this week. Not too big, but just really want to encourage that whole enjoying different wines with food. It doesn't have to be the same old same, whether it's the same old wine you normally drink or it's the same, cliched pairing. You can be adventurous. You can push it outside the square, and it's really fun and really cool when you nail it, and it's really cool experience. So yeah, try some of these, definitely. And so that's it. Thank you as always for joining us. Sante Borak Yahua.